is the catalyst for the new DFARS mandate?
The catalyst has been multiple situations and multiple incidents that have arisen over the past couple of years. I want to go back all the way to 2010 when we started seeing an increase in cyber incidents and cyber attacks, especially on government contractors and federal agencies. And what transpired from those events is where the federal agencies, especially the Department of Defense or even the civilian agencies, when they started realizing that the government contractors or their partners, so to speak, were not taking responsibility or were not demonstrating stronger information security controls of their environment, which through the postmortem of those incidents led to a conclusion that government contractors were the weakest link, and yet they were not doing enough to secure their networks or secure government's data. Now, I'm sure there are plenty who will say that's not the case, but if you go back and read through the postmortem analysis, that's where it started. And hence, not just Department of Defense, but if you look at OMB circulations and the FAR regulations, they're all driving towards having better cyber incident reporting capabilities for government contractors, and they're demanding that. And also, what doesn't help is today's day and age where cyber incidents and cyber attacks are on the rise. So the federal government, including the Department of Defense, is trying to do something about it. That's what drove that.
What is the DFARS around the safeguards? That's not the right question, is it? I messed up. Okay, it's okay. Is that the right question? No. I have it at number. Oh, okay.
Clause.
I got it.
What
Sorry.
are the
All right,
clauses?
I'm ready. I'm starting.
And you're going to pause that between the question and the answer.
What are the DFAR clauses related to? Sorry, can I start over? I see you, Bebesh. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Do it again. What are the DFAR clauses related to this new mandate?
So there are three clauses around this new mandate, and they are 252.204.7008, 252.204.7009, 252.204.7012. And all three clauses have certain nuances and requirements regarding this new mandate. But the main clause, which is the question that you asked, was around safeguarding of covered defense information and cyber incident reporting, which is the 252.204.7012. That is the main clause and the main requirement. The other two are around disclosure of, or limited disclosure of any kind of cyber incident for subcontractors, and the compliance with safeguarding of CDI was the first one, which was the 252.204.7008.
So you mentioned CDI. Can you tell me what covered defense information is?
So covered defense information is generally also called controlled technical information or controlled unclassified information, which is information that the Department of Defense could mark or stipulate in their contracts that they believe require the government contractor to safeguard that information. And it could be information that is identified in the contract, the task order or delivery order, and provided to the contractor by DoD or on behalf of DoD in connection with the performance of the contract. It is information that is collected, developed, received, transmitted, used, or stored on or behalf of the Department of Defense in support of the performance of the contract. Now, there are 23, I believe, categories that are defined by NARA, the Archives, National Archives, that outline what could be potentially CDI or marked as CDI by the Department of Defense. And those categories can start all the way from budgetary or financial, go to agricultural, go to defense, go to missile, go to IT. So it's various categories around specific information.
So when must contractors, government contractors, be compliant with these 3 DFAR clauses?
The mandate requires them to be in compliance by December 31st, 2017. So by the end of this year, they need to be fully in compliance with the mandate. Now that said, there could be possibility that government contractors are not fully compliant as long as they have communicated that with the Department of Defense Office of Chief Information Officer and let them know where they've fallen short or where they're weak and what their plan of action is to remediate those issues.
So what happens if they don't have any contracts that are subject to these clauses? Do they still have to be in compliant?
It's always good business practice to be in compliance with these regulations, even though the contracting officer may not have amended the contract, or the new contracts that the government contractors are receiving may not have specific clauses outlined that stipulate them to be in compliance. That said, oftentimes government contractors, depending on the size they may have a challenge to demonstrate compliance because of resources, lack of resources, and the bandwidth to demonstrate compliance.
So if a contract was issued a while ago, before the DFAR mandate, a contractor would receive a mod for these additional clauses to be in the contract?
If the contractor has an existing contract with the Department of Defense, technically the contracting officer should be providing them a mod as far as the determination is made by the contracting officer that the existing contract does have CUI or CDI information.
Let's see. Let me cut that out. So how will government contractors demonstrate compliance?
the DFARS clause, especially the clause that talks about safeguarding CDI and cyber incident reporting, the clause requires government contractors to adopt the NIST special publication 800-171, which has a list of controls listed within the publication itself, the guidance document. The government contractors are required to review those controls and assess their environment and see if those controls or those measures are in place within their organization. Do they have equivalent controls or measures in place to satisfy those requirements that are documented in the special publication 800-171? In the event if they don't have those controls or those measures implemented, then they need to come up with a remediation plan that allows them to demonstrate that they're working towards becoming compliant and implementing those measures that are currently not in place. One of the key requirements in this clause, the 2012 252.204.2012 clause, is that at a minimum, within 72 hours of the identification of the cyber incident, the government contractor needs to notify Department of Defense. And the timeline is within 72 hours. Now, in some cases, the contract may require them to notify the Department of Defense or the agency much sooner than 72 hours. I tell clients to keep it simple. My advice to all government contractors is you do not need to boil the ocean. Keep it simple. The NIST 800-171 document is driven by policies and procedures. So I tell all my clients and government contractors and prospects is start with the basics, start having policy and procedures in place, and then start having basic requirements in place, and then build upon that.
So in our business, we work with helping government contractors with their accounting systems. And so we'd like to understand how exactly does this mandate affect the accounting system, and what should government contractors be concerned about with their accounting and their ERP system?
The mandate basically says a contractor, a government contractor, if you collect, store, transmit, process, use, touch any covered defense information, either on behalf of DoD in their system or within your internal systems. So this could be a government contractor's internal back office support system, that you need to demonstrate compliance. So you need to assess those systems against those NIST 800-171 measures. Now, accounting systems is a very tricky system. Typically, I would not expect government contractors to input, store, or process any CDI data, covered defense information, through their accounting system. That said, I have discussed and communicated with a lot of government contractors who, for various reasons, do put covered defense information in their accounting system. Whether it is for billing purposes, where they identify the specific project that their people are working on. It could be around developing a software that could be used for missile defense. It could be manufacturing a part that could be used for developing or building any particular defense systems. Or it could be as simple as identifying longitudes and latitudes of their carriers. within their billing or within their ERP systems for record purposes. All of that could trigger the mandate, because that could be tagged as or marked as a CDI by the contracting officer. My advice to government contractors is have a conversation with their contracting officers. Understand for their specific contracts, what would that agency consider CDI? And based on that, make sure if there is no other requirement to input CDI, process CDI, store CDI within their accounting or ERP system, that they don't do so. Because otherwise, your accounting system will be in scope for compliance.
So it sounds to me like an educational process, and it sounds like it's not just contracts. You would want to involve your IT department, your contracts department, and your accounting department. Is that true?
Actually, it's more than that. It's not just your accounting, IT, contracts. I think this whole mandate is around cyber incident reporting and cybersecurity requirements. I think it's bigger than just 3 or 4 departments. It's the whole organization that needs to work together. Primarily, yes, the contracts department, I would say, would drive some of this, because they are the ones who would first get the contracts, so they would have a specific understanding of what the contract requirements are. At that point, they need to get the other departments, including legal, HR, finance, IT, records management if they have a separate department, a compliance department if they are separate, and their board involved, because at the end of the day, it's a strategic move, it's a strategic decision. This compliance requirement, while tagged as cyber, it touches pretty much all the different entities or subunits within your organization. So I don't think it's just a 3 or 4 department process. Now, technically, and in my experience, what will end up happening is that the IT department gets tasked with it, because it's all information security related controls. But if you look at the guidance, it has controls around personnel screening, it has controls around maintenance, facilities, it has controls around governance, which require all the other business units to be involved. It also requires ownership from the various business heads and the board, so that it's not just about a one-time exercise, it's an exercise that is sustained, and you have to show annual compliance to the Department of Defense.
Now, is there any type of certification that you get if you're in compliance, that the government contractor gets or receives? And can they self-assess that they're in compliance?
There is no certification, so to speak, that a government contractor would obtain if they go through an assessment exercise. Can they be self-assessed? Yes, they can be. I tell government contractors, I ask them to go back and look at their contracts or their mods and see what does the contract dictate. If the contract doesn't dictate that the assessment be done by an independent third party, then self-assessment would be sufficient. As long as in the self-assessment exercise, they demonstrate how did they go about doing the assessment and what the results of the assessments are, and at the same time provide what we call the plan of actions and milestones that outlines the controls that are not in place or that are weak, and how they intend to remediate those controls or those measures. if the contract would stipulate to have an independent third party come in and assess their controls, then typically what we see in the industry is a security assessment report being a deliverable that the government contractor can expect. And that security assessment report can then be submitted to the Department of Defense or the contracting officer for that agency, along with the plan of actions and milestones. And in that report, it would indicate that a third party has done the assessment.
So we talked about how a contractor demonstrates compliance. What happens if they can't demonstrate compliance by December of 2017?
Technically, government contractors are required to report to the Department of Defense CIO's office within 30 days if they are not going to be fully compliant with the mandate. Now, the timing of those 30 days is up in the air. Is it based on the contract mod that they received? Is it based on the contract requirements that are currently in their existing contract, or is it after 12/31/2017? Right now it's up in the air. There's not much clarity to it. What I have advised government contractors to do is if they find out that they need to comply with this because they have this mandate, because they have CDI, CUI information as part of their performance of the contract, that they do the assessment right away and notify the Department of Defense OCIO's office with their results.
So we talked about the clauses being in the contracts or the mods. So the clauses do stipulate what the CDI information is. Is that correct?
The contract should identify CDI information. That said, is it always going to be in the contract? Probably not. That's why I had indicated that the government contractors should work with their contracting officers and identify the CDI or the CUI specific to those contracts as a follow-up action item, and not rely just on having it in the contract.
So how will this affect subcontractors?
The requirements of the DFARS mandate flows down to the subcontractors, and it is the responsibility of the prime contractors to make sure that their subs or the subcontractors are in compliance or can demonstrate compliance. Now, a lot of these large organizations, large government contractors, have an internal vendor management program and have internal questionnaires that they have developed that they have flowed down to their subcontractors either before they start a relationship with them or throughout the relationship. They ask the subcontractors to demonstrate compliance with certain information security and cybersecurity requirements. So for those organizations, it's not going to be that much of a change. I think they're already working and they're already doing so. the organizations that have not had a robust vendor management program, especially the prime contractors, they're going to have to develop something that allows them to flow these requirements down and keep up with those requirements and keep up with the subs compliance with those requirements. Because at the end of the day, the prime is going to be held responsible in the event of a cyber incident reporting non-compliance or a cyber breach with the subs where they were not able to identify and or notify the prime and then the DoD.
That was my last question. How are government contractors handling this mandate when they use software that's in the cloud?
So the new mandate, or I should say the update to the mandate that came out in October 2016, the government clarified some of these things, and especially around if a government contractor was using systems that are provided by a cloud service provider or are what we call the CSP systems. In that case, what the government is asking, or in this case the Department of Defense is asking the government contractors to do, is to use FedRAMP accredited CSPs. What that means is, let's say if a government contractor is using an Office 365, which is the cloud-based version of their email with Microsoft, and they believe, the government contractor in that instance believes that their email does store, collect, touch, process CUI, CDI information for various reasons, business reasons, as a business process, then that particular Office 365 system is now in scope from a mandate standpoint. In that case, because it's a cloud hosted and it's hosted by Microsoft, the government contractor doesn't really have any control over that system. But what that can do is they can ask Microsoft to migrate them, the government contractor, to an Office 365 version, which is FedRAMP accredited by the agencies, which will then take care of some of the security requirements that are mandated by this particular clause.
What if contractors are dealing with vendors that are not as sophisticated as a Microsoft? You know, it's a smaller vendor that has 3,000 to 5,000 clients, and I'm specifically referring to an accounting system. What's the responsibility of the vendor that builds and issues that accounting system?
Interesting question, and it's an uncharted territory. I think a lot of the vendors who find themselves in that boat are trying to figure out how to demonstrate compliance and how to give their clients, which are government contractors, the assurance that their systems are safe, secure, and can potentially pass the muster test of this particular mandate. However, that said, my advice to vendors typically when they ask me is that you need to have somebody internally take a look at the NIST 800-171 controls that are listed in that special publication and assess your environment against that control, against those controls and the control families, and see how you fare with them. Where you believe you have gaps within your environment, they need to start remediating them if they want to be in the business providing services to government contractors who specifically deal with Department of Defense. Because at the end of the day, yes, it's an educational process where we have to educate the government contractors to not put or input CDI, CUI in the accounting system, but in some cases the contract may require them to do so for billing, invoicing purposes, or any other government contracting, consulting, compliance requirements. And because of that, they would have to put that information, and in that case, they would have to have the vendor demonstrate compliance.